men exploring their sexuality threatens patriarchy. It threatens heteronormativity. Why I work at Field is because we're trying to create space for all the identities.
So would you say on air that Field is the gay agenda?
Sometimes the gay stuff has happened and I was okay with it.
And
Do I have internalized homophobia up inside me?
Do you want me to check?
But yes. Oh yeah, there's definitely some homophobia up in there. I'm gonna like run for president one day and they're gonna be like, the world's first heteroflexible president.
You're like, I'm bi now.
Ooh, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I'm your host, Carbon.
I'm Emily.
I'm Maceo.
And welcome to the show. This episode is presented by Vizzy Hard Seltzer and Field, but more on that later.
Clink.
So today we are so happy to be joined by Maceo Paisley. As many of you know, we've been co-hosting the Field Socials here in Toronto, and that is where we've had the pleasure of meeting and now working with and co-hosting this episode with Maceo. Maceo is an artist, a dancer, a thinker, an optimist, and an experienced designer, and he is head of experiential marketing at Field. Thank you so much, Maceo, for joining us.
Hey.
During our personal time exploring on Field, we've noticed the term heteroflexible pop up a lot, which has sparked our interest in exploring this topic today. So after a few lovely chats where we found out that Maceo himself identifies as heteroflexible, we knew that we needed to have you on the podcast. In today's episode, we'll be exploring what heteroflexibility is, its roots in sexual exploration, and we'll be debating whether or not debating whether or not heteroflexible people are part of the LGBTQ2S+ community.
Let's start from the top. How would you explain heteroflexibility, more specifically to someone who's just never heard the term before?
It's one of those things that is pretty hard to distill down to a single line of text because sexuality and gender are so personal to so many people. So there's a bunch of definitions that could be applied. But I think the starting point is in breaking down the prefix and the suffix, right? So hetero and then flexible, which is to say like you're starting from, your disposition is towards heterosexual relationships. And then there is some flexibility where there is, for one reason or another, you might explore connecting with someone of the same sex, right? And the opposite would be homoflexibility, which is to say that like your disposition is going to be same-sex relationships, but there's a context in which, for one reason or another, you might explore some other kind of connection. Where it gets interesting is what are those contexts, right? And do those contexts somehow make you queer? Or are you not queer but have queer tendencies? You know, and that's where I think it starts to get really exciting.
In terms of, does that make you queer? Or like, I guess on the other hand, if you're homoflexible, my immediate thought is like, well, are you just bi? So what's the difference between bisexuality and heteroflexibility?
What we've seen in like talking to our users in Field specifically, some people say that they're straight basically, right? But they might be in a threesome with their partner who is a different gender,
right?
And another person who's the same gender as them, like a guy, a gal, and a third person who is maybe another guy. Right. And they're not afraid to come in contact with that person.
Yeah.
Everyone's together. It's a beautiful, sweet moment. Bodies are touching. But if you were to come back and like run the tape on that encounter, it would be like, yeah, that ain't an entirely straight scenario that's happening there.
Yeah, for sure.
The definition of bisexuality really covers folks who experience unequal attraction to all genders. So what would you say the purpose of adding in this whole new label is?
So this is where Field is exciting because when you're talking about the gender and sexuality spectrum, in some ways, there's no limit to the amount of terminology and language that you can add because the more we get nuanced with our language, the more space we create for different identities to take up and hold their space for their identities, right? And to be named and like recognized. So while it can be confusing to have more and more terminology emerge, it's also like a real positive to be able to say, hey, I'm at this point in my journey with my sexuality. I identifying fully with the experiences of queerness or bisexuality that I'm seeing out in the world.
Yeah.
But there is certainly something more going on to my sexuality than what somebody would call straight. I am interested in exploring what that range is for me. And that's where heteroflexibility comes in. That's where bi-curious comes in.
Yeah.
That's where homoflexibility comes in, because sometimes it's context, but it's also sometimes people getting to know themselves before their nascent thoughts and feelings really come to the surface and they're able to say, no, I'm bi.
Yeah.
The other side of it is they may never actually get to that point. They may say, actually, I'm totally okay with having, same-sex experiences in a threesome or more some for some context, but I'm not actively seeking out to go on dates with someone of the same gender, or even if I were approached, I'm kind of like, not so much, but I'm also not going to deny myself connection with people when we're having an intimate moment. If everybody's cool and everyone's good looking, like what are you going to do? Just sit in a corner, which is some people's, that's a kink that they like too.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
Sitting in the corner, right? But I think that's the question is like, sometimes sexuality is gatekept.
Yeah.
That you have to be this level of expert in kink. You have to be like fully queer before you can start taking up space.
Yeah.
And then it's like, that may be true. Because there are people who have had wildly different experiences in terms of coming out and their way they're seen and the way they're treated. And I think also terms like heteroflexibility allow for people to let people who have had different experiences maintain a space for their experiences of queerness and being able to recognize that, when I walk up and down the street, no one is, looking at me or expecting this thing or the way that I've lived my life. And so it could be pointing to lifestyle too. It could be pointing to something on the inside. It could be pointing to something outside, just like anything else in that conversation. The big difference, like you said, with bi is the equal attraction,
Bisexuality doesn't have to be equal.
Or it could be.
It can be, but it's definitely a sliding scale. I do think both are valid, like you said. Like I don't think there's anything wrong. Personally, for me,
Wait, is the debate with me?
Yeah, I'm fighting you. No, I'm joking.
Oh.
I'm joking. Okay. I'm not fighting you. No. I'm just like, I did a lot of research on the topic of like seeing like what different people's opinions are, and I've chatted with a lot of people at the field socials. For me, with labels, personally, I do agree with you. I think it's a very personal experience. So we've done an episode, like you said, on bisexuality where I shared my identity and people were mad about it.
You were mad about it?
Yeah, like I call myself a bisexual lesbian and people don't like it.
Yeah. Are you saying like you're tipping the scale, you're adding a couple more beans to this bucket over here?
It just feels right for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
That's the whole thing, right? Like there should be a space for that as well. I think that when we seek to be understood and we seek to belong and we seek to have ourselves contextualized, it can get really murky. Because you're like, hey, what I'm saying to you might feel like it's trespassing on your identity.
Yeah.
But it's actually just me expressing my identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And sometimes people struggle with that. Yeah.
No, I think that's very well said.
So we talked a little bit about the positives of identifying as heteroflexible and like the openness that it can create, the comfort that it can create. Have you yourself, or even potentially users on the app, experience negatives of that term?
What it can do is sometimes it can create outsized expectations from people who are, further away from the fluidity side of things. It's one of those terms that creates more questions than it answers in a certain way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, what do you mean by heteroflexibility? So in the field, we did an article on the term and we surveyed users and we asked them about it. But we also did a virtual program that was inviting people to be, a little bit more educated on it. And then we do a series of group chats around it. And inside the group chat, it was interesting because there were many people that were saying, well, I think of myself as heteroflexible because I find myself attracted to the same sex, but it's fetishy, it's kinky, it is not part of my daily, right? And so one of those problems is like, well, is there sort of a reduction or an objectification of a person's place in your sexual life as just a filler, just as an object? And like, so then it's like, oh, you're really just looking for me to just kind of show up and service your you and your partner.
Yeah.
And that, I think, comes with a lot of baggage from people even in bi communities, right? Like they can feel objectified when really what they're trying to do is figure out who they are and express who they are, right? And then the other part of it is just like people being like, what are you talking about? Why wouldn't you just name that you're gay? Why wouldn't you just name that you're bisexual? And part of that, and this is true for I think me and for also other males that we see in the app, is that because of the way, you know, heteronormativity is and, you know, homophobia is, there are people who are like, well, one, I don't know that I'm gay or that I am bisexual, but also there are a lot of people in different communities looking in who are going to say, well, if you're a man and you have any kind of attraction to another man, then you're gay, right? Because that's like the operating system that's going on in their head and it's very binary.
Yeah.
This isn't probably the most radical of terms, but it is still one of those terms that continues to like try to carve out space for differences amongst difference. And that's always going to be contentious. I mean, I think for me, what's interesting is just the way fluidity in general can cause problems for people because they're seeking to create and live in a world that they understand. And so the gay straight binary is very helpful for people.
It's a clear box.
It's a very clear box.
Yeah.
And the negative is people using the term heteroflexible to sort of virtue signal that they would be more sexually open than they actually are. So that's the other side of it too, which is to say, oh, you know what? I'm finding out that I'm seeing a lot of people in the world, the tides have turned, and for a large number of people, they're not interested in straight men anymore. So what you're going to do is you're going to perform or you're going to signal heteroflexibility in order to reap the benefits of adjacency to queerdom, but without having to do any of the work or take on any of the risk.
That's so interesting that there are straight men that think that they have to perform queer to be able to, I guess, be more attractive.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's absolutely a thing. There was an article that talked about, you know, people updating their settings and saying they're heteroflexible simply to benefit specifically from like bi women by saying, no, like I'm cool, I'm down, I'm like with you, right? But also like benefit from the perception of straightness.
Right.
Right. And so it's a double-edged sword, which is to say that you could be targeted and villainized by people in both queer and straight communities for even mentioning that you're bi.
Yeah.
But then on that same token, the opposite is where you're not being villainized within the context of marginalized communities, you get to signal safety, you get to signal openness, you get to signal progress without actually having to do anything about that day to day.
Yeah.
And I think people rightly so have strong feelings about that because people being able to choose their identity and choose when they benefit versus when they're marginalized, when there's a ton of people who don't and can't do that, that's a real concern.
Yeah.
So moving on from that, I want to get a little more personal with you, Maceo. Can you share some of your personal experiences with identifying as heteroflexible and what makes it feel right for you and what types, get saucy with it, and what types of experiences has it opened up for you so far?
Like, is this like an ASMR? Like, do we turn the lights down? Like, what are you actually asking me?
Details.
But before we get into that, this episode is sponsored by Field.
What does the phrase spit it out mean to you? Field, a dating app for the curious, has worked out a definition.
And according to them, to spit it out is to speak your deepest desires into existence, which is a sloppy process if done correctly. And here's what that looks like.
I do want another girlfriend, so I'm on the dating app, so I'm on Field. Yes. And I love being on Field because like I'm learning a lot of new terminology while being on Field, right? Yeah, some of you can relate. Like for example, I recently learned the word heteroflexible. What the fuck is that? Like, I read heteroflexible and I was like, what, is this just straight people announcing that they can do yoga? Like, okay, cool, namaste. So I didn't know what it meant, so I Googled it. And basically, heteroflexible means that you are 90% straight and 10% gay. 90% straight and 10% gay. That doesn't make sense, you guys. It doesn't make 90% straight, 10% gay. I mean, the Republicans were right. The gay agenda is working. God, 10% gay? Let's fucking go, bro. Let's fucking fucking go, dude. Like 10% gay today, that's a finger up the butt. Okay? Tomorrow, you're a bottom. Let's fucking go, dude. I love Field. It's so much fun.
If you're curious about exploring your desires, it can feel scary at first. To get started, you need two things: a space you feel comfortable in and a community that understands you.
And Field members have both. And with community and space, here's a snapshot of what happened on Field this past year.
181,103 people changed their sexuality within the first year on Field.
And 57% of those who change their sexuality on Field become less straight.
Love it. While exploring your desires can be intimidating, the cure for intimidation is laughter. At their ongoing comedy show called One Night Stand Up, Field members come together to cry laugh about all things desires and dating.
So if you are in search of your community and a place that you can explore your desires, get both. Download Field, that's F-E-E-L-D, and spit it all out. With the app, you can get free entry to Field's comedy shows, which are exclusive and free to all Field members, as well as access to Field socials, virtual events, and more. So get the app, that's Field, F-E-E-L-D. Thank you, Field, for sponsoring this episode. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Vizzy Hard Seltzer. And with Vizzy's vibrant flavors, you can now follow your own vibe.
For those of you who know Queer Collective, you know that Vizzy has been a longtime supporter of us and our mission to create accurate and positive representation for the entire queer community. So if you are a hard seltzer drinker, we highly recommend drinking and supporting one that you know also supports the queer community.
And now, back to the episode.
From your personal experience, what makes heteroflexible feel right for you?
That I can work with.
Fine.
I would say that much like why I work at Field is because we're trying to create space for all the identities. And myself, I am trying to create more space for myself as well in the world. And so what that means is I have to be honest about my actual behaviors. I'm attracted to women and I talk to them and they talk to me, and heterosexual.
Good for you.
That's great. But I will also say that there have been encounters that I've had or experiences that I had that disrupt the general archetype of just straight life. Yeah. And when you're being honest about where you derive pleasure and where you derive excitement and where you derive intrigue and fascination, I can't just pretend that those experiences somehow just are grouped into straightness to preserve, like this psychological heteronormative view of myself. I think being truly honest is really asking those hard questions, because the reason that they're hard is once you come up with an answer that doesn't fit your current way of living, you either have to start living a lie or you have to start living differently.
Yeah.
And at least for me, this was a term that honors tendency and the habit and the inclination that I have as like a heterosexual person.
Yeah.
But still says like sometimes the gay stuff has happened and I was okay with it.
Okay.
Where did the term heteroflexibility even originate? Do you know its origin story?
Field actually has an article about this, but what the article says is that in 2002, it emerged from like college culture. And that makes a lot of sense. People are exploring and then they're also like, taking a linguistics course and they're like, heteroflexibility, that tracks. But it's kind of unclear where it like was first seen. It started popping up on Reddit around that time. And I think like many things, it's like, where did boy math and girl math like come from?
Right.
It's like a thing that emerged from the zeitgeist and then like kind of got some steam.
Next, we kind of want to dive into heteroflexible as a term for self-exploration. And I'm wondering, in my experience kind of like swiping around on Field, I've honestly only seen men use the term heteroflexible. And I'm wondering if you might have some ideas as to why that might be.
Well, I don't know what your settings are, but well, this was actually interesting about Field is that 62% of the people on the app evolve their sexuality within the first year. So what you will see is that some people, they come into the app and they're unfamiliar with the terms.
Yeah.
And then they learn what the terms are by using the app. And then they're like, oh, I kind of like that heteroflexibility term.
Yeah.
Or they have an experience that shapes their sense of self. For example, they might have MFM threesome and they're like, I'm straight, right? Because it's a male, female, male threesome where the men don't really come in contact, right? Or then later in their field journey, they might have an MMF threesome, which would be the men kind of have contact and the woman, is there as well, right? And so they might then say, oh, okay, I can't just have up here that I'm straight because I've
realized that the where you put the letters matters.
Oh,
is that what you're saying?
Does where you put the bodies matter?
I just didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know the order of the.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's one of the things where it's like you can come on the app, you can read something and say, oh, actually, this terminology, I identify with this terminology, right?
Yeah.
Or you could have an experience that shifts your identification with yourself. And so within the first year, 181,000 people have changed their gender, moving further queer.
So would you say on air that field is the gay agenda?
I will neither confirm nor deny that field is the gay agenda, but it does in fact happen.
Yeah.
And we create space for the gay agenda for shizzle.
Okay. I think our listeners at home can
interpret that as they must.
Yeah. But my question here really is, why do you think that more men are choosing to use the term heteroflexible
I think
than women?
that, and this is me speaking just from my personal experience, right? I think that because of homophobia and heteronormativity, you are going to sometimes find yourself penalized simply for being curious about an experience that has another man in it.
Yeah.
But on field, it's a kind of a safer space to carve out more nuance in your sexuality. And so you can drop that in there and kind of sort of see what you get. And then that gives you an opportunity to explore parts of yourself through connection and through relationship that you might not have been able to do because it's really hard to, like, let's say, walk into a gay bar as someone who's heteroflexible.
Yeah.
It's also sometimes challenging for someone to say to their partner, hey, I want to have a threesome with a guy, but like for me, like let's get a guy for me, you know, like, and so I think this is like part of it is about just creating the opportunity for people to discover who they are, discover what they're interested in, explore their curiosities in a true and authentic way without having to be penalized.
Yeah.
Right. And so let's make the baseline not heteronormative. Let's make the baseline not homophobic and create a space where people have to communicate or are encouraged to communicate about the nitty gritty, about the nuances and say, well, what do you like? Well, you know what? I know what I don't like. And I know there are some things that I'm curious about, but I can't really say all the things that I like yet because I haven't tried everything.
Yeah. I think if I can share my personal analysis, it's kind of one that we had in our bisexuality episode, which I would definitely recommend that folks check out after this one. But kind of where this starts is also a stat with bisexuality too, whereas in the Journal of Bisexuality in 2022, they did a survey and found that the majority of bisexual identifying people are women. And most studies are finding that women are just 2 to 3 times more likely than men to identify as bisexual. And then I think this kind of comes down to a little bit of what you're pointing at, where it's like men are definitely more penalized for saying that they have any form of interest in men. It's like that instantly goes to, oh, you're gay.
Yeah.
Whereas with women, it's like your experimentation is considered hot because it's appeasing to the male gaze. Whereas with men experimenting with other men, it's actually a hit on your masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, another way to put it would be that you could say that men exploring their sexuality threatens patriarchy, it threatens heteronormativity, and women exploring their sexuality doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? But that's all the more reason why you would need a separate context in order for people to explore things, because it might actually be too much for someone to make a leap to say, oh, you know, I think I actually might be bisexual. I think I might be gay. And then they have a few relationships that are, not straight. And then they have a few relationships that are straight. And they're like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm bisexual based on the terminology, but I really I like who I like kind of thing. And I think that so many people in the field, they're like up for an experience and they don't want to predictate what the boundary is because they're not trying to limit themselves from having an opportunity to grow.
For sure, the term heteroflexible, like bisexuality, can be questioned as like not being totally valid and being only a gateway, these kinds of things. I think it can be a completely valid identity if it feels right for you. But I also think that it is a really cool gateway. I do think it is. I think it gives an opportunity for men to have that, I don't know, that in between.
Yeah.
To just like give them
get comfortable
and give them permission to just like go and explore something that has otherwise been so taboo and has provided them with like so much internalized homophobia their whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that permission, that space needs to be there for people to go ahead and figure that out for themselves.
Yeah. And one thing I will add to that as like a caveat is you definitely can identify as bisexual and never had an experience with the opposite gender. I think there's plenty of people who are in long-term relationships and like still are very valid bisexual people and like are valid heteroflexible people as well. It's like you don't necessarily need the experience to affirm it, but it also is a good means of exploration.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's helpful to have for sure.
Of course.
There's many different ways to go about it. And it's nice to have that experiential arena to discover yourself. You know, I want to bring people into a room and let them look into each other's eyes and talk and feel the pheromones and the chemistry and then be like, oh, I was talking to this dude. I'm a dude. Yeah. And he was there with his girlfriend, but I was like talking to him more. Yeah. You know? And I'm like, right on, bro. Yeah. You know, you might be heteroflexible. Yeah. And then he's like, I think I might be. Yeah. You know? And so then you talk to them the next morning and he's like, I'm definitely heteroflexible. Yeah. Because I did some flexing. Yeah. That's actually the opportunity that Field presents you with when you're signing up. I've been a Field user for more than 5 years, and Field is like the first app with this many gender and sexuality options. So it's definitely been more than 5 years.
Do you feel like you have any internalized homophobia up inside you? And
do I have internalized homophobia up inside me? Yeah. How could I honestly answer that question with anything but yes. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah, there's definitely some homophobia up in there. I think that it would be really hard for anyone to not have some internalized homophobia.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. No, I agree with that.
That's what this age is about. It's about, do I have less than I did 3 years ago? Do I have less than I did 2 years ago? Do I have less than I did 1 year ago? Yes. Like more than half of the people on Field who are straight are chatting with someone that isn't straight. And I think actually the first time I maybe used the word heteroflexible wasn't because of just the scrolling, is because, well, if I'm attracted to someone who's non-binary, if I'm attracted to someone who's trans, if I'm attracted to someone who's queer, what does that mean for my sexuality? Yeah. Right?
That is a good question to ask. I think in general, in my mind, if you're dating someone who is non-binary, who's queer in any way, but you're straight, you're in a queer relationship. But I don't necessarily think that makes you queer yourself. Yeah. That's my take personally.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought, right? To talk to someone and them say to you, you're straight. I see that's in your bio, right? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, I'm not a woman. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm attracted to you. Yeah. So whatever I have to put in my bio to to make this happen, I'm gonna put it. Yeah. You know? And it's like, and that day I became heteroflexible. Yeah. You know, it's because you're hot. Yeah. That's the negative side of it too, actually. There can be a predatory aspect to just sort of willy-nilly flipping your sexuality to gain access to someone romantically. Yeah. Right? Like I have to say that in the same breath because I think that's true.
Do you think that queer people in general are just like completely writing off anybody that identifies as straight on the app? They're just like, straight, nope.
Some people are. Some people are
have it
definitely
in their bio.
Yeah, they're like no straights. Yeah. Right. And then also there, we have a comedy program and one of the comedians is like heteroflexible, bi-curious, like bless your heart, let me know when you figure your shit out. And that is a real sentiment that some people in the queer community have.
Yeah, it is. It all comes down to like preferences and boundaries. But also at the same time, I do think that being risk adverse to people who are bisexual or heteroflexible, it's more of an insecurity within you, in my personal opinion. This is not everybody's opinion, but for me, if I say no bisexuals, no heteroflexible people, no this, no that, to me, it's an insecurity that I have that I'm going to get abandoned by this person.
We all have so much life experience and it has come with, I think, a high cost for so many that sometimes we overcorrect on our boundaries and like to keep ourselves safe so that like X thing doesn't happen. I think that for queer people who are not interested in bi-curious or heteroflexible people, from a relationship standpoint, that's fair. Heteroflexible people feeling objectified or used is also fair. Like a really great opener that I've received on Field is, I see you have heteroflexibility in your bio. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
Like, ask me,
Yeah.
and then based on my answer to you,
Then make your mind up.
then make your mind up.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally fair. But I do think there is merit to wanting to date people who share your own experiences and feeling that kind of sense of community and sense of understanding in your own relationships.
Sure.
And it feels nice, to be honest, to be like around other queer people. It does feel really good. But again, I'm not doing the thing where I'm like totally discounting a whole group of people. I am asking what's like your fluency with like queerness, like how comfortable are you with all of these things? And that's something that I am going to keep in mind if I'm going to go on a date with you. I think all of these things are valid. I think a lot of it is somewhat of a trauma response of like, if you have gone on a date with somebody and you've had that really negative experience where they've been embarrassed to be out in public with you, but they'll do all of these things with you behind closed doors. Like, I think that was a very, I don't know, it's a common experience for a lot of people, definitely trans people for sure.
Yeah. And I think that we come into the world and we're given these scripts and those scripts don't always work for us. And the more we can redline, outline, underline, and edit those scripts to suit who we truly are, the better off we're going to be. But I think at the same time, like the more I reduce my internalized homophobia doesn't automatically mean I just become more queer.
Yeah, of course.
That's true.
But it does make you more comfortable in yourself and your own masculinity.
Absolutely. Now that's 100% true.
Jumping into our last and final topic here, we kind of wanted to chat about whether or not we think heteroflexible people are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And this is definitely a topic that we've explored a lot at the Field Social in conversation with different people. But I'm wondering, in your opinion, whether or not you believe that heteroflexible people are part of the queer community.
To be 100, I'm probably not even the best person to answer. We should just ask people at the social what they think.
Okay, let's do it. Let's go to the social.
Say your sexuality and whether or not you think heteroflexible people are part of the queer community.
I'm queer. I guess I'm asexual, in other words. Pansexual is another term you could use for it. I don't know about heteroflexible people. I think everyone's sexuality is a bit fluid. I think it depends whatever that individual thinks it means for them and how they engage with the queer community.
I identify as a queer person. I mean, in my belief, whoever identifies as a queer is a queer.
Well, I'm trans non-binary and pansexual. They're in the queer communities.
Yeah, identify as queer and bisexual. I think I loved your answer and thought the same. Like, I think people who want to self-identify as queer, then they're queer. And I think for people who find that heteroflexibility provides a more comfortable space for them to entertain that side of their identity, whether that's where they stay or that's just a first stepping stone, that's amazing.
I'm queer. I think that, yeah, probably. Like, they're exploring their sexuality. I'd consider that queer in whatever capacity.
As somebody who's just kind of exploring and discovering this side of me, I personally think that I'm bisexual. But my gateway drug to bisexuality was calling myself heteroflexible. So I tend to be more on the listening side of things and just sharing what it is like for me and keeping like an open mind in terms of like, who am I? What labels can I slap on myself that make me feel good about my existence as a human being?
Would I date a heteroflexible person? Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm non-binary myself. I think that's like I don't think I would have any qualms with that.
Sure, yeah. Why not?
Well, dating is a different story. As long as they don't deceive me as a girl, I will totally date them.
I think as long as there's consent and interest in sharing the same activities and having the same fun together, then why not?
Probably. Yeah.
Depends how they got to kind of like that label for themselves. So then I'll just check for phobias of sorts and what their inner kind of like struggles are.
I mean, there is a gay agenda to be spread. So if we're not allowing for heteroflexibility, then we're not spreading it very well. There should still be space and openness for people to explore.
I think part of participating in a community in a real way is taking the good with the bad. And so if you haven't felt, wouldn't feel, or would seek to avoid the the beauty of and the freedom that comes with queer life, but also the potential harm and setbacks that could come with it, the risks, then it's probably a good opportunity to take stock of how appropriate that term is for you.
Yeah.
For some groups of people, rightly so, a need and desire to protect the sanctity of where the spaces that they go.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to end up at a queer party and then there's like a dude rubbing up on you and he's like, yeah, but I'm heteroflexible.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, but you're not acting like it.
Yeah.
You know, you're acting behaviorally like someone who's not respecting my personal space, and you're kind of showing up in a way that someone who is not interested, learned, or even respecting of the cultural customs of this space, given the body type that you occupy in the world we live in, and that I feel like is warranted. You know, it's got to be on the terms of the people who are the marginalized group. So if you're truly an ally, then that means you show up as a guest honoring the customs of the people who have been through the struggle and saying like, hey, like, where do y'all want me to sit? Like, you know what I mean? Like, not coming in with this expectation that you'll be catered to.
Yeah.
We love a guideline, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you know, like.
We love a guideline.
Tell me what to do.
You're like, I mean, I don't want to do something disrespectful. It's like, well, I come to your place. I see the shoes on the floor.
Yeah.
I take my shoes off.
Yeah.
That's me. Some people are going to come to your place, see the shoes on the floor, and then just like walk past them with their muddy shoes on.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, you saw the shoes on the floor.
Yeah.
But you didn't take them off. And they're like, well, I guess, you know, that was maybe your choice. You're at home already. That's just where your shoes are. It's like, well, just take your shoes off.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, if you had told me,
Right.
I would have just taken them off. So a guideline helps because it explicitly names,
Right.
you know, expectations, and it doesn't leave room for guest room.
That's a good point.
I will say that's not the intention of this episode, but if you are someone who's heteroflexible or an ally and is looking for this information, there's an abundance of articles on Google. So if you just Google how to be a good ally in a queer space, so many things are going to come up for you and spell it out for you very clearly.
Thank you so much, Maceo, for joining us. We really appreciate you being here and being on our episode. You are our second international guest ever. So thank you for being here.
Awesome.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out our episode on bisexuality. That'll be the first link in the description. Make sure that you hit subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you are on the podcast app, because it really helps the channel out. And that's everything that we have for you today. Until next time, peace.